Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Each week, we bring you leading nuclear deterrence experts for a lively discussion on current topics. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, Director of Strategic Deterrence Programs at the National Strategic Research Institute. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
All right, and welcome back to NucleCast. Of course, I am your host, Adam Lowther, and today we have a special guest, of course, and it's a little different background than we're used to. Today is Scott Sudduth, who is a founding partner of Washington Navigators, which is a strategic consulting firm focused on federal and international issues affecting higher education, innovation, and competitiveness, and nuclear national security. Now, Scott started his career, he worked on Capitol Hill and then moved on and ultimately ended up on working some of the contracts, the M&O contracts for the weapons labs. And so worked as a senior leader at the University of California System, who, of course, as many of you know, ran Lawrence Livermore National Lab for many years, and then went to the University of Chicago and then the University of Texas System, who also they have a UARC, and then Texas A&M. So he's got a lot of experience in the management of labs. And so we'll have a different discussion, whereas in the past we've talked weapon systems, we've talked warheads. Today we're going to talk a little bit about workforce development, and we're going to talk about some of the interesting concerns about like the 1,000 Talents program. That's, I worked China issues for many years. And so this is one of the areas I've written some articles on. So we'll talk that. And so welcome into the show, Scott.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here. And I must say, don't ask me how to build a pit, but I can sure talk to you about the politics and that surround building a pit.
Well, it's funny that you should mention the politics surrounding building a pit, because I don't know if you know this, but I'm really good at math, and I have done the calculations on both the pits and politics, and I have found that politics are actually more explosive than plutonium pits are. So I'm sure you can help us with that today.
Well, that's the argument I've been making for why folks need Washington Navigators. So bring it on.
So, one of the reasons I like you most is, of course, because you are, like so many others, an adopted Texan who moved to Texas. You realize the superiority of Texas. I, of course, was born there, and so I am a native, but you got there as quick as you could. And so before we go to talking about politics and workforce development, one of the great things that, I would like to give you the opportunity to do is to tell our listeners what you like most about Texas.
Well, that's a hard question to answer, because, of course, I love the people. I love the barbecue, but I also love the dove hunting in South Texas. And the only thing I don't like is the fact that the wind blows from Nebraska, where you are, straight to where I grew up in Lubbock, and there's nothing in between. And I was a big cyclist, and I would much rather cycle a mountain any day than take on the winds of West Texas.
It's true. It's very true. I just finished, I don't know if you've ever read it. We're totally off topic here, but I just finished a book called The Empire of the Summer Moon, which is a great book about the empire of the Comanches on the plains.
Yes, I've read it. One of my favorite, it was as you well know, it was in many ways a hard book, gruesome in many places, but wow, what a story, not only of Native Americans, but also of just how rugged Texas was, and in many ways still is.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a free tip to our listeners. Go read The Empire of the Summer Moon. You'll love it. So if we go ahead and move on to our topic of the day. So you spent most of your career in the management of labs, and you were there for the creation of NNSA. You've worked on the recompete of the labs, and for those that don't know, our labs are government owned, corporate operated, and they're GOCOs. It's sort of a special relationship, and it's a different type of working environment. Do you think you could maybe explain sort of that, how that works in that unique relationship for those that may not be familiar?
Well, I'll sure give it a try, but it is not something that is conducive to breakfast conversation. That's for sure. But of course, particularly the nuclear weapons labs, speaking specifically of Los Alamos and then the sister lab, Livermore, they actually evolved out of a unique relationship between the government and the nonprofit research community. So for the first 75 years of Los Alamos' existence, it was actually managed by a nonprofit. The modern model does include both a kind of a hybrid model involving some corporations or private sector groups that have experience in operations and in operating large, complex facilities, as well as teaming with universities who bring a lot of the research expertise and the fresh ideas to the table. And I think perhaps the fundamental reason that the government manages these facilities through this, what's called, as you referred to it, the management and operation, the M&O contract, is that by giving this private sector or this combination of nonprofits and private sector the opportunity to run the lab, in theory, it's going to help with recruiting and retaining a workforce and helping keep the facility more nimble and on the cutting edge of innovation and technology that it would not necessarily have if it were completely inside the government fence.
And do you think that, you said it yourself, it's sort of the ideal. Do you think it's an effective model and that it's working as it was designed?
I think at the end of the day, yes, because again, if you're looking at the nuclear security enterprise, the fundamental goal is to stockpile stewardship and to maintain deterrence. And at the end of the day, we have achieved both of those. But it's not without its challenges. It is the process that the government goes through for every 5 to 7 to 12 years of competing these labs. It's complicated. The teams that form to compete, it doesn't necessarily always feel like it's a fair fight. And the infrastructure at many of the facilities is not where it needs to be. But again, we still, fortunately, lead the world in this very important and critical national security arena.
Now, before the show, we talked a little bit about questions of workforce development. So from sitting on the boards and working the contracts, how do you see our weapons labs in their ability to recruit talent, to maintain talent? And, there's been a lot of discussion about the average age of many of our lab folks, that it's sort of, creeping up. And I think it's somewhere in, folks are in their 50s on average. Do you see that future talent pool problem, or do you think we'll be able to do exactly what we need and recruit, particularly as, like the Kansas City plant, Sandia, they've all grown dramatically in the last, 5-7 years, as many of these modernization programs have taken place. Do you see any future issues?
Absolutely. I would say it's tied with maintaining our edge on critical technologies. It's tied with that for being the top challenge facing the national nuclear security enterprise. Let me set the stage just a little bit. If you look across the security enterprise, that includes both the national labs, the production sites, and NNSA, you're looking at about 49,000 employees. Now, most of those employees are on the M&O contractor side, meaning they work for Triad at Los Alamos, or they work for CNS at Pantex and Y12, etc. Of those 49,000, a little over 25% of them are eligible for retirement today. And if they don't retire today, they're certainly going to retire tomorrow or very soon. So you're already looking at a significant attrition that you have to keep up with just to maintain where you are. But as you pointed out, several of almost the entire complex, their mission is growing. So in addition to replacing those who are retiring, you're actually having to grow the workforce too to meet the expanded program. Los Alamos, for example, is now trying to hire almost 2,000 employees a year, and attrition is only making up for about 25% to a third of that. So the challenge is significant.
Now, one of the interesting things, like whenever I was in graduate school, almost all of my, cohort of graduate students were Chinese nationals and many would return back to China. Some have stayed in the U.S. And so over time, we've seen in American universities, we have a lot, particularly in the sciences and the engineering and math, we have a lot more nationals from other countries. China is one of the largest senders of students to the U.S. And so therefore that, just like the military has a shrinking pool of 18 to 24-year-olds for, whether it be physical issues or legal issues or drug-related issues, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the pool of potential engineers and scientists that we would draw from for the weapons labs and for the production complex is also shrinking. Is that correct? Incorrect?
Well, I would say that is correct. Particularly if you look at across the United States, and I can't remember exactly which year we will reach this, but you're already seeing that the number of 18, 19-year-olds who are going to college is declining. Now, the good news is that's not the only, while college is an important on-ramp, it's not the only on-ramp, and there are a lot of jobs across the nuclear security enterprise that required skilled labor, that require training that you can get elsewhere. But there is no question that the college-age population in this country is declining. And of course, you just put on top of that the fact that China is almost, in terms of population,
Five times larger.
four or five times larger than the United States. So naturally, they could be sending more students.
And then American kids, want to be social influencers, and they want to. I think communications is the number one degree granted in the United States, as opposed to in China, for example. STEM degrees are the number one degrees granted. So we have a distinct cultural challenge to get American kids interested.
And it's a challenge that I see many of our higher education institutions responding to, as well as the NNSA and the labs. I know several of the universities that I have worked with over the years have really focused on building STEM opportunities for domestic students, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. It is not a problem. It's not a challenge that you fix overnight, but we see a lot of progress, and we also see the labs, like for example, Los Alamos invest in its community engagement with the northern New Mexico community. They have created STEM programs with the community colleges. They've dipped down into the K through 12, or I would say 8th grade through 12.
Right. So as you look at sort of the big challenges in the labs and in the approach, whether it be the human capital side or whether it be facilities or whether it be policy, because you deal with a lot of policy. That's sort of one of your specialty areas, is the politics and policy of DC. What do you see as the largest sort of 2 or 3 challenges that for the success of the labs that we'll have to overcome?
Well, I want to stay on workforce for a moment and talk about kind of what NNSA does now. But really kind of focus on, I think they need to do business a little differently, as do the labs. Right now, the Department of Energy, the government, and I know many of the military branches, they will host these job fairs and career days on college campuses. I was on a recent college campus attending a national security seminar. And it just so happened that literally in the foyer in the rooms next door to where this national security seminar was going on, all of the NNSA labs were having a job fair to try to attract students. I went over and talked to the representatives from the different facilities, and they had barely any traffic.
Really?
What students came, were really interested. And so obviously the labs were frustrated, but I think they interpreted it, they just thought the students were interested, which actually is not the case. But the job fairs don't really, they're one-offs, and they don't really, it's not the most effective approach for the NNSA to work with universities. They need to have a more targeted approach. They need to provide some opportunities for students at the undergraduate level through like capstone programs. And then more importantly, instead of doing the fellowships and the internships, which again are more like one-offs, they actually need to engage the faculty, folks like you, Adam, who are training, who have graduate students, who are interested in doing research with you. Engage the faculty, engage them on research. Pay those graduate students to come do the research. And then you're going to find that this becomes a much, I think, a much more dramatic pipeline for the labs. So the approach that they've taken now, and they've increased, they being the NNSA, their partnerships with minority institutions, which is important. But again, these are more one-offs. They actually need to go in and at the undergraduate level, bring these students in, give them a chance to actually see what working at a lab is like, and then engage the faculty in a longer-term relationship to attract those graduate students.
Yeah,
so that'd be the first thing I'd do.
That's an interesting point. And it makes me think. So I work for the National Strategic Research Institute, which is the UARC of the University of Nebraska. And so next Friday, for example, we're having a day where we, the UARC folks, go meet with the faculty to talk about potential areas where they could be engaged in research, and with Stratcom and DITRA and some others. And so in some respects, based on your comments, I'm like, okay, maybe we're doing something right, because that then filters down to the students that the faculty may bring in to support the work. And I know at Kansas State, they've got their nuclear engineering department is really good, and they're reaching out and trying to work with folks. So it seems that you worked at Texas, and UT has a great UARC that works for the Navy.
Absolutely, yes.
And A&M is doing hypersonics, and so it seems that there's, they're leading the hypersonics group. So it seems that there's some successes out there, but we probably need more, and because I would imagine you get onesies and twosies graduating each year from these institutions where you might need, hundreds or thousands.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other issue here that, frankly, some of the labs would take issue with me on this, but they tend to always go back to the same high quality university instead of expanding to other universities who may not have the brand that the university that they have gone to forever and ever, but still have very quality students who could help and who would be eager for the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like if you look at Livermore is, it's got quite a few folks that are Berkeley graduates. And California is a big state, has lots of other universities that may produce folks that are, really, really, interested and might want to see the utility of spending a career in the lab. So your point is well taken.
One other area I might just touch on briefly regarding workforce, and then happy to move on to other topics. But one of the biggest challenges right now in the nuclear security enterprise is retention. They're noticing that the number of people leaving after 5-6 years on the job is ticking up. And so the contractors and the complex need to be focused on retention.
Do we know why that is?
I haven't actually. I know there's some interest within NNSA right now in trying to study that problem and to learn more about it. But I can tell you just from experience, my own experience at some of the labs and talking to employees, one of the issues, of course, is childcare. Another issue is housing. It is tough to find. In fact, in some of the communities, like northern New Mexico, it's hard to recruit young employees to begin with because of just the lack of housing stock. But childcare, providing these new hires an opportunity to learn beyond just the division that they've been hired in, and to see not only how what they do, contributes to the overall mission, but also to get opportunities to work in other areas within the lab. Adam, I've spent way too much time in higher ed, senior management, and kind of one of the inside jokes is we're damn good at training them, in the classroom, but we're not very good at providing career growth opportunities and training to our own workforce.
Yeah.
And the labs are similar.
Yeah. Now, I did forget one thing. We were supposed to take a break. So before we move on, we'll take a quick break. Our guest today is Scott Sudduth, and we'll be right back to discuss the 1,000 Talents program and the biggest challenges that the labs are facing. So we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. Okay, welcome back. That was a quick break for a word from our sponsors. So we're with Scott Sudduth. He's talking about the biggest challenges he sees across the labs. And you were mentioning childcare, housing, which, if you spend much time out at the labs, Livermore it's not in San Francisco, but it's still in a very expensive area. Los Alamos, one of my absolute favorite places. But like you said, Santa Fe's close, but it's incredibly expensive. And then Los Alamos the town itself doesn't have much in the way of housing. Sandia's it's in a tougher part of Albuquerque, and Albuquerque's a tough town. Whether you go to Pantex, Amarillo, it's part of the great state of Texas, but some folks might not want to live out on the windy plains.
A calm day is 35 miles an hour. You just,
It's a great day. That's the day you want to ride your bike, is on that day.
That's right. Well, the good news is I have seen both the M&O contractors are beginning to step up and to try to engage with their local communities to address some of these problems. For example, again, the small community of Los Alamos, well, I think it sits at 7,000 feet. It's one of the prettiest places on Earth.
Absolutely.
But it's geographically locked by either mountains or canyons. But having said that, even the town council has begun to realize that they need to modify some of their policies so that it's easier to build some multi-unit housing for young professionals, and also to encourage a diversity of businesses. To attract people to live and work there. The other thing that some of the labs are doing that is also, of course, we all learned so much from COVID. One of some of the takeaways from COVID is that there is some work that can be done off-site. Obviously not classified work, but some of the business operations and other work that can be done off-site, and that relieves some of the pressure for a concentration of both housing and facilities right around a lab facility.
Right. Yeah. So is there we've talked about some perfectly logical challenges to have. Are there any other big challenges that you see? And then we'll move on to the 1,000 Talents program before we end the show.
Well, obviously, the biggest challenge is, frankly, just how expensive this enterprise is. Now, it has received strong bipartisan support in recent years, and I would expect that to continue on Capitol Hill. But it is a significant federal commitment to stay on the cutting edge of the technologies and to upgrade the infrastructure, some of which dates back to the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I often give a lecture on what I call the cost effectiveness of nuclear weapons, and as you look at the weapons complex itself, I think it's what $20 billion or so in a federal budget of $6 trillion. I think we lose through waste, fraud, and abuse about $70 billion a year in just Medicare and Medicaid. So, while $20 billion is a lot of money by anybody's standard, it's not Jeff Bezos kind of money. But it's a lot of money for you and me. But in the relative,
is that Jeff Bezos of 8 months ago or 8 days ago?
Exactly. But it's in the federal budget, as I think about it, it's less than 1/100th of 1% of the budget, and it gets us a lot of really good engineers and a lot of really good scientists to keep that bench that we clearly need in this country. So for me, at least, go ahead.
I need you to come to Washington and be prepared to testify. You have some very compelling points to make.
Yeah, that's one thing I often tell folks about the military and about the defense contractors is that what you're not just buying weapons, you're buying the ability to engineer things and to create things, and those are the types of things you don't want to lose.
The brain power. And, for example, we took our eye off the ball on continuing the ability to have the capability to manufacture pits. And we've spent some money to reinvest and reinvigorate that capability. But it would be better to sustain it than to have to rebuild it.
Now, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to, since you've spent so much of your time working in higher ed and with big universities, I've worked a lot on Chinese espionage issues and written some about it. And it's a big concern for me and for many others. And one of the issues is, like, for example, I live in the Kansas City area, and the University of Kansas, which is less than an hour down the road, recently had a professor that ended up going to jail for ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And I watched as these cases pop up all over the nation at universities. And so, the Chinese have the 1,000 Talents program. They're very good at industrial espionage. They do it in bulk as opposed to the Russians, who are very skillful at it. But how do you see this problem? Is it the challenge that, some think it is, or do you see it as sort of we oftentimes see a dramatic event and we say, oh my gosh, we have a national problem because of one event. But if you use a little bit of math, you see that statistically that one event is an anomaly and it's very, very rare. Would you say that we actually have a problem, or would you say that this is not the problem that we may think it is because of the stories that hit the national press?
Yeah, as with most things, I would say the reality is somewhere in the middle. Um, like you, I have a lot of professional experience in this arena. I've represented universities that have, through their own efforts, discovered faculty or students that were not who they had presented themselves to be. I've also been involved in congressional hearings of alleged espionage at some of the national labs. So I would say espionage is real, both in the commercial sector and in the research community. My personal experience, I have worked for universities that have somewhat shied away from doing classified research, and I have worked for those who have embraced doing classified research. And as you would expect, the latter, the community that has done a lot of classified research and worked a lot with the national defense community, they have always they've had a higher sensitivity to this challenge and have had safeguards internally for some time. It is the broader research community that I think for a number of years did not take the problem seriously. But because of the working with the FBI, other investigative agencies, arms of law enforcement, and seeing some of the evidence that's been brought forth, most major research universities now, as well as the national labs, are putting in safeguard measures like, for example, if you're a faculty member at most major universities now, you have to disclose potential conflicts of interest that you may not previously have had to disclose. And that would include if you were working for a Chinese talent program. And I know several universities where if you are working for a Chinese talent program, you have to choose whether you're going to continue working for us or them, but you can't do both.
Right.
And I think there's a growing, one of the challenges has been, of course, at the federal level, because so much of our research funding for our major research enterprise comes from the federal government. The Department of Energy would have one set of rules. The Department of Defense would have another set of rules on disclosure and who could work on a grant and who couldn't. And NIH would have a third. There is now a more concerted effort led by the President's Science Advisor and OSTP to have some coherence and continuity in the federal rules so that people know what the expectations are.
Right. Yeah.
And I would say many of the universities that I work with, including Kansas, by the way, now have a chief research security officer.
Mm.
And one of the things that they do, particularly for new faculty, is they'll have a 101 session before they do any international travel, particularly if they're going to countries that have a history of trying to steal our IP.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of do's and don'ts with faculty. So just to raise the overall awareness level.
Mm. Yeah, that's great to hear. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time. Our episode has gone by quickly, as it does every episode. So I want to thank Scott Sudduth for joining us. We had an interesting discussion about the labs and how they're managed and the human capital issues. And then we capped it off with a brief talk about the role of the 1,000 Talents program and espionage and how the universities across the nation are trying to deal with that. So I want to thank you, Scott, for joining us. We appreciate your time and appreciate your thoughts on some really compelling and interesting topics.
Adam, great to be with you, and I look forward to seeing you at Salt Lick and Dripping Springs. That's about halfway between Panhandle and Houston. We can continue the conversation.
Oh, I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks to the listeners, and we'll see you on the next episode.